Hannah Briley had everything going for her: a new promotion, loyal friends, and a bright future, but one short walk home on a quiet Leeds street turned her life into a chilling mystery that would expose a hidden predator living in plain sight. On a crisp Friday evening in Leeds, the city hummed with the energy of people unwinding after a long week. The air smelled faintly of takeaway chips and spilt lager, and the sidewalks were dotted with clusters of friends laughing under streetlights. Among them was 25-year-old Hannah Briley, a well-liked marketing assistant who had just received a promotion at her firm. She had planned a casual night out with close friends at the White Stag, a local bar they often frequented after work. It wasn't a wild celebration, just a few drinks, some shared snacks, and the warm company of people who had seen her through stressful months of deadlines and long hours. Hannah was the kind of person who balanced responsibility with just the right amount of fun. Friends described her as someone who never drank too much, never took unnecessary risks, and always texted someone when she got home. That night, she wore a bright red coat, jeans, and a soft wool scarf. She carried a black leather handbag that matched her ankle boots, and her phone was always within reach. Inside the bar, she had danced briefly, sipped a single gin and tonic, and posed for a few selfies with her co-workers, laughing as she tossed her head back in genuine joy. Everything about her movements seemed casual and routine, nothing out of the ordinary. She left the bar just before midnight. CCTV footage later confirmed the time, 11:47 p.m. Hannah walked confidently down the main road, turning onto a quieter residential street that led toward her flat. The route was short, well-lit, and lined with trimmed hedges and parked cars. Several small houses sat behind white fences, their windows glowing with the light of late-night TV. It was a neighborhood known for its safety, a place where parents let kids play outside until dusk and neighbors waved at one another over morning coffee. No one expected what was coming. The next morning, when Hannah's roommate, Zoe, woke up around 9 a.m., she instantly sensed something was wrong. Hannah's bedroom door was open, the bed made untouched. Her phone was off, an unusual sign for someone who normally scrolled through news and messages first thing in the morning. After a few hours with no sign of her, Zoe called Hannah's parents, then the police. At first, it seemed like a simple misunderstanding. Maybe Hannah had stayed at a friend's place, maybe she lost her phone, but as the hours passed with no contact, dread set in.by early afternoon, a missing person report had been filed and officers began searching the area. What started as a routine welfare check began to feel more serious when they reviewed the CCTV footage. The final image of Hannah showed her walking toward a construction site at the edge of her route. After that, she disappeared. There were no further sightings, no phone pings, and no witnesses. Just a woman who had walked out of a bar and into complete silence. Police officers combed the streets near where Hannah was last seen, retracing every step from the White Stag to the edge of the residential neighborhood. The initial assumption was that she may have taken a detour, stopped somewhere, or encountered someone she knew. But as officers pulled footage from every available camera along her route, a clearer and more troubling picture emerged. Hannah's movements were calm and deliberate. She wasn't intoxicated, stumbling, or distracted. She moved steadily, phone in hand, occasionally glancing at the screen. Nothing about her behavior suggested concern or distress. Then, at 12:03 a.m., she walked past a local off-license and into a blind spot just beside a fenced-off construction site. That was the last time she was seen. There were no signs of a struggle, no clothing left behind, and no witnesses in the area at that time. Hannah had simply vanished. As hours turned into days, the search widened. Volunteers joined local police in scouring alleyways, wooded patches, and canals. Drones were flown overhead, and dogs were brought in to trace her scent. Nothing. The silence surrounding her disappearance made it more terrifying. It wasn't just that she had gone missing, it was the absence of any evidence that troubled Detectives most. On the third day, a council worker found a smashed phone near a set of industrial bins behind an abandoned office building. It was confirmed to be Hannah's. Her case, still intact but cracked, had her ID and a faint lipstick smudge. The phone was dead, and forensic teams noted it had been wiped clean. There were no fingerprints. Someone had handled it and intentionally removed all traces. Still, the location of the phone gave investigators a rough idea of where she may have gone or been taken. Search teams doubled efforts in that direction. 5 days after her disappearance, a break came. A man walking his dog along the edge of the canal spotted something wedged between rocks in the shallow water. It was a handbag, black leather, scuffed and water-damaged. Inside were Hannah's wallet, bank cards, a set of keys, and an unopened packet of tissues. None of her belongings had been taken, which ruled out robbery as a motive. The canal was searched extensively over the next 48 hours. Divers covered every meter, and eventually, under a thick blanket of reeds and branches, they found her body. Hannah's death sent shockwaves through the community. She had been killed by a single blow to the head with a blunt object. The coroner determined it was swift, likely immediate. There were no signs of sexual assault, no defensive wounds, and no drugs or alcohol in her system. Her clothing was undisturbed. And her shoes were still on. The precision of the attack suggested it wasn't random. It was fast, silent, and purposeful. Whoever had done this hadn't panicked or rushed. They knew what they were doing. And they had vanished just as quickly. The neighborhood that once felt safe now buzzed with fear. A predator had struck, and no one had seen a thing. Detectives began cross-referencing Hannah's case with other unresolved incidents in the area, searching for any patterns. While combing through cold case files, one stood out: an attack from 2 years earlier involving a woman named Lucy Hemsley. She had been assaulted just 6 streets away from where Hannah disappeared. Lucy had left a pub after a night out, walking alone just after midnight. Like Hannah, she had also taken a well-lit route through a quiet neighborhood. She had been found unconscious in a nearby park, her injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. Unlike Hannah, Lucy had survived. However, the trauma of the attack led her to move abroad shortly after, and she had refused further media contact. Her case had been labeled as a random act of violence due to lack of evidence. Detectives reopened the file and re-examined the evidence with fresh eyes. Lucy's clothing, which had been preserved in storage, was sent for advanced forensic testing. Technology had improved significantly in 2 years, and investigators hoped for a breakthrough. A partial DNA profile was extracted from material found under her fingernails, something the initial team had missed. It wasn't a full match in the national database, but it was close enough to narrow down potential suspects. The DNA belonged to someone who had once been in the system for a minor offense, likely committed as a juvenile. That gave police a short list of names to pursue, including one that caught immediate attention: Callum Price. Callum was 28 and lived less than a mile from where Hannah had vanished. He had no current criminal record, no known mental health issues, and worked part-time as a delivery driver. On paper, he appeared unremarkable. He had never been questioned in either case and had no known connection to the victims. But when detectives ran a background check, they uncovered something unsettling. Both Hannah and Lucy had public social media profiles, and Callum had followed them for years, interacting occasionally but never enough to raise alarms. More disturbingly, he had taken photos of both women in public without their knowledge. A warrant was quickly secured, and a search of Callum's small, cluttered flat began. Inside, officers found a locked drawer containing old phones, SD cards, and a hard drive. What they discovered was chilling. There were folders containing surveillance-like images of women walking alone, mostly at night, often within the same radius of his home. Among them were dozens of images of Hannah, taken on different nights, from behind bushes, parked cars, and alleyways. One video, dated a month before her death, showed her walking the exact route she would take the night she was killed. Forensics matched dog hair from one of Callum's coats to fibers found on Hannah's clothing. While not conclusive on their own, combined with the photo evidence and social media tracking, it painted a clear picture of someone who had been quietly observing his victims. He hadn't approached them in public, hadn't made threats or contact. He simply watched, waited, and then vanished into the night. Hannah had never known she was being followed. The investigation now centered on understanding how Callum Price had stayed under the radar for so long. With no violent criminal record and no immediate ties to his victims, he had avoided suspicion even as he methodically tracked women through familiar streets. Detectives began combing through his digital footprint, uncovering years' worth of internet searches and bookmarked pages that painted a disturbing portrait. He had researched the routes women commonly walked home from bars in his area, read articles about avoiding detection, and even searched for ways to erase digital evidence. On one blog, bookmarked in his browser, he had highlighted a comment that read, "Be quiet. Don't leave a trace. The less they know, the longer you last." Forensic analysts worked through Callum's hard drives, uncovering more grainy videos of women walking home alone. They were all filmed from a distance, usually between midnight and 2 a.m., always with a deliberate and steady hand. Investigators noted that his technique had improved over time. Earlier recordings were shaky, unfocused, or too distant. But by the time he was tracking Hannah, the angles were precise and the footage suggested he had followed her closely, just out of sight. When brought in for questioning, Callum remained calm. He denied knowing Hannah personally and claimed he was being set up. He insisted he had never taken those videos and that someone must have planted the evidence. He had no explanation for the presence of Hannah's photos on his hard drive or why her DNA was on a jacket hanging in his wardrobe. Without a direct match from the murder weapon or definitive eyewitness testimony, detectives knew the case was still vulnerable. But they pressed forward, piecing together a story from digital breadcrumbs and the testimony of behavioral experts. One of the key breakthroughs came from a forensic entomologist who examined the timeline of insect activity on Hannah's body. It placed the estimated time of death within 20 minutes of her final appearance on CCTV. This coincided almost exactly with when Callum's phone showed no movement, going dark for precisely 35 minutes before reconnecting to a tower closer to his flat. Though circumstantial, it provided another piece in a growing puzzle of indirect evidence. A second major clue was found in Lucy Hemsley's old belongings. Hidden deep inside the lining of the jacket she had worn during her attack was a red scarf. That didn't belong to her. It had been missed in the initial examination but now took on greater significance. Callum's DNA was found on it, older and degraded, but still viable. This scarf tied him not only to Hannah's case but to Luce's too. Prosecutors now had a case that, while lacking a single damning piece of evidence, was built on an overwhelming structure of consistent, incriminating details. Each clue, when viewed alone, might not hold. But together, they revealed a methodical, premeditated pattern that pointed straight to Callum. The predator had been careful, but not perfect. The weight of everything was closing in. The trial of Callum Price drew national attention. Reporters filled the courtroom benches, while true crime enthusiasts and grieving locals followed each update with growing anticipation. For many, the case represented not just the tragic loss of Hannah Brierley, but the haunting realization that someone capable of such violence had been hiding in plain sight. Callum sat stone-faced throughout most of the proceedings, showing little emotion as the prosecution laid out the chain of evidence, each detail stitching together a chilling portrait of a calculated killer. Prosecutors began by establishing Callum's obsessive behavior. They detailed how he had monitored Hannah and other women for months, possibly even years, using social media, nighttime surveillance, and hidden recordings. Experts explained how he had mapped their walking routes, waited for the right opportunity, and struck when he believed the risk was lowest. They argued that his attacks were not crimes of impulse but careful executions designed to leave behind as little evidence as possible. Hannah's murder, they said, had been the culmination of a long-brewing fixation. Witnesses included forensic analysts, cybercrime experts, and behavioral psychologists. Each one testified to a different layer of the case: the fibers, the videos, the DNA, and the psychological profile. A key moment came when a specialist in criminal behavior described Callum's pattern as rehearsed control, targeting victims in predictable environments, ensuring that his actions remained invisible until it was too late. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the reliability of the digital evidence and the interpretation of forensic findings. They claimed the footage and images could have been fabricated or misunderstood, and argued that DNA transfers could occur through secondary contact, but the jury was unmoved by these arguments. The cumulative weight of the evidence, particularly the videos found on Callum's hard drive, the hidden scarf from Lucy Hemsley's belongings, and the matched dog hairs, was overwhelming. After a 3-week trial and 6 hours of deliberation, the verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Callum Price was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in his final remarks, described the crimes as methodical, predatory, and entirely without remorse. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered to light candles in Hannah's memory, while her parents gave a short, tearful statement, urging people to look out for one another and never assume safety based on familiarity. They also thanked the officers who had never stopped searching. The community, once shaken by fear, began the long road to healing. A mural of Hannah now stands near the White Stag pub, painted in warm tones with the words "She should have made it home" written in bold beneath her image. It serves as both a tribute and a warning. For Hannah, one ordinary walk home ended in horror, but her story would not be forgotten. It had revealed the dark reality hiding beneath everyday life, and reminded everyone that even the safest streets can harbor unseen danger.